Well, happy Father's Day weekend, everyone. We've got, let's see, 5 fathers around the table. And Melanie, you are married to a father and you had a great father. So you're part of the club here today.
Thanks, Wayne.
Welcome to the public square. Dave?
Well, we wanted to talk about the whole question of fatherhood and parenting, but we are hesitant to get into that at the radio level because so many times when people start into these conversations, they either move into a tribute and type program, and then that's kind of starts to get soft and mushy. And people who have not exactly had the best experiences over their lifetimes with fathers or mothers begin to feel either left out or it takes us into certain directions. And so I wanted to avoid that sort of conversation. But yet that being said, I wanted to ask some significant issues about our country and where we are. And I just had some questions. So I'm going to get to those in a few minutes. But before we do, I want to take a couple of seconds and thank many people who have responded to our first in a series on After Trump. I thank you for affording us good humor. There were some pretty funny lines that came up out of that particular program, and no one seemed to be offended that we were making light of a few things, and not certainly about the president, but about before Trump, after Trump, BT, AT, and all of that.
I was offended.
Yeah, yes.
Nobody cares.
But
that's okay. That's acceptable.
Yeah.
What really encourages me is the caliber of this listening audience. It gives me great amount of hope because what we didn't get were a lot of people who simply shut down at the moment the conversation was discussed. Because for many people, the experience of Donald Trump coming back into the presidency has been very emotional. A lot of people felt that it was a bad mistake for Donald Trump to lose the last election. It was a bad outcome. A lot of people feel that when he lost, that there was a disenfranchisement in regards to trust of the system. There was a lot of grievance involved. And a lot of people have had some extraordinary high hopes for where his second term would go. Some of those hopes have been exceeded and some of them haven't been met or may never. But there has been a certain amount of penetration from the media towers in trying to convince us that there is a cult-like atmosphere around Donald Trump and that Christians are willy-nilly drinking the Kool-Aid and marching in lockstep with MAGA. If you can even define what MAGA is, I don't even think that as a movement, word is almost never used here. As a movement, I don't even know if MAGA ever had an incorporation status or an officer elected or an organizational meeting, or it's just been sort of a perception and it's been sort of a way of trying to describe something.
Someone's made a lot of money on hat sales.
Yeah. But what we didn't get was a lot of people reacting as if someone had bumped into their cultic experience. Zero of that altogether. And so for people who think that the support of Donald Trump has been mindless and that anyone who would have ever voted for Donald Trump is a goober-eyed reactionary that has no thought or conscience. We have never experienced that. I'm sure that there are people who have cast their hope on a political savior, but we just don't seem to have any of them.
They don't listen to the public square.
Yeah. So that's always kind of encouraging. And also people recognize that we're not making it personal. We don't know Donald Trump. All we know about Donald Trump is what you know about Donald Trump. It's what we read and what we see. And of course, that would make sense because even in this day and age, who could know a president, right? There's 326 million of us and there's one of him. So, I mean, what are the odds? And Truth Social doesn't count. I'm sorry. We don't do social media. So because we don't, well, anyhow. So let's get some listener responses, Rob.
Well, we had a note come in. Dear Rob and team, I'm in the middle of this program and you are discussing political party affiliation. In my state, when I go vote in a primary, it appears that I must identify as a Democrat or Republican. Being registered as an independent does not appear to be an option. Help. Am I missing something? Thank you.
Great question. And different states have different rules about party affiliation and what it means as far as your ability to vote in a primary. In many cases, primaries are set up to mostly get candidates selected. And that's selected within the context of which ballot. So you have to pick a ballot because you can't paint on both sides of that fence according to the rules in most states. Now, that in and of itself is a whole bunch of legal questions all put together, which we're not going to get into right now. The question is, are you in a state where you must pull a R or a D, or you can't participate in a primary? Now, there's not as much of that as you would think, because a lot of times local ballot issues and nonpartisan races also appear in primary ballot times. So you can go in and pull an I ballot or a non-affiliated ballot and still vote, but you're limiting, obviously, yourself to those nonpartisan issues.
Yeah, as a registered independent, you may give up the right to vote in state rep primaries, congressional primaries, but your local school board, maybe judge races, different county commissioners that are nonpartisan, you'll get a non-party list, a ballot.
And just for clarification, based on what we're saying today, is that when you walk in a state where you have to choose one ballot or the other, party affiliated, that if you choose an issues-only ballot, then you are considered an independent because you have not selected an R or a D ballot. I could walk in having the last 4 or 5 years voted with under one party ballot in the primary. I could go in and request the other party.
In some states.
But that choice on the day of the primary switches my registered party affiliation to the other party.
Right.
So your party affiliation is associated with which ballot you pull in a primary election.
Now, the question is, does being in that situation as pulling an independent ballot or being registered as an independent, some states will accept independent registration. Some states don't accept independent registration, which is what Melanie's trying to get to. It's automatic if you pull on issues, you don't sign a form. It's just done. Now, there are other states that when you come in and say, I voted in the Republican primary 2 years ago, I want to vote in the Democrat primary this year, you have to sign a statement.
Or an affidavit.
An affidavit that you are now officially switching parties because those states have more firm tracking on the party system. It didn't used to be this way. And it shows the power of the political parties at the state level to write their existence into election law. No one has yet truly made a successful challenge on that in regards to whether those election laws are disenfranchising you and your right to vote. That could be an interesting conversation.
And in some states, in different places, they want you to identify with that party affiliation as much as 30 days in advance.
Yeah.
So that you can't go in on a whim or last minute and say, I want to switch today because I want to vote in the other party, when they would say, well, you're not a member of that party because you didn't pledge your allegiance 30 days in advance.
See, this is what happens when a private political association gets the power of law working to protect their monopoly status.
Well, there's also, I can think of friends that live in an area that is represented by people that they disagree with at both the state rep, state senate, and congressional level. And if you look up their voter registration, they would say they identify with a party that they don't agree with a lot of the party, but they participate in that party's primary because they feel like that's the only way they have a say in the game.
Well, and it's important to note that when you take the position as an independent in many states, you do sacrifice the ability to influence the outcome of one party or the other in regards to their candidates, and that is a certain surrender of, in essence, your voting power. And so that's where ultimately that to reach the strategy that we think is appropriate in regards to free agency, it's going to be important that we recognize there's two sides of that. One is us getting free of surrendering to the party system as it is currently structured. That's the first part, is getting free from the shackles of that. And then secondly, us operating by creating an alternative pathway for people who are equally constitutional free agents to enter either party at which point in time, or both parties, at which point in time we are electing people who are constitutional free agents, whether we elect them as Democrats, Republicans, or independents. When we move from simply protest to an offensive position where we are sending candidates that have the potential to win on either the Republican or the Democrat side or the independent side, then in essence we've overcome this fallacy of a two-party system. Now, the problem with that is most people will click off their radios or walk out of the room or take their checkbook with them because that's a lifelong endeavor, and it's hard work, and it takes a long time. Now, right now, where you're seeing that strategy manifested the most is in the general election, where you cannot be denied access to a ballot based upon political affiliation or the lack thereof. That's right now where free agency is absolutely dominating the electoral process. I would contend that it's free agency that elected Donald Trump president. People stepping outside of any form of party boundaries, crossing lines all over the place, and even showing up for the first time for someone who was running as something other than. And that's where I think the whole MAGA thing came in as sort of a cushion, where Trump people were able to say, well, yeah, he's on the Republican Party, but he's really MAGA. In other words, that was a form of free agency.
And we see the parties manipulate the process all the time. I can think of one state that was about to have a very healthy primary for governor in one political party. But you saw all the party heads, you saw all the party people get behind one candidate because of, dare I say, monetary reasons. And that cleared the field for everyone else. So the parties manipulate it all the time.
All right, coming up, we have more listener comments and some other things to talk about today on the Public Square, and we'll get right after it in a moment. Stay with us. Back with you on the Public Square today. Around the table, Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, Alan C. Duncan, our producer, Melanie Elsey, Jeff Sanders, and I'm Wayne Shepherd. And one more thing about this first listener comment, Dave.
Well, we're really at the graduate level of conversations about political parties, election law, and court proceedings. And I don't want that to be overwhelming to people because it really isn't. It's a lot more like a friendly snowball fight. All right. And for those of you that have lived in Florida your whole life, then I'll try to come up with a better illustration. But the idea here is that it is possible to overcome the system through free agency, independent thinking, and independent candidates. Now, we don't endorse a philosophy that says independence for independence sake. In other words, the political parties can be good, bad, or indifferent. They're a methodology. The problem is the blind loyalty to them and then being frozen out by the parties from being able to have another point of view. Now, people that are committed to the, quote, two-party system don't want to hear this because their answer is always pragmatic. But you have to ask yourself, how have we been doing with that for the last 100 years as a country? The bottom line, particularly in our Congress, not very well. There are candidates who are constitutionalists with whom we agree, who are able to run as Republicans or Democrats and have succeeded in casting their votes in state legislatures and the U.S. Congress consistent with their beliefs for a long time. We can go back 50 years and point illustrations. Now, they are not a majority, but they have been there and they are still there. The point is, as voters, we have to continue to put principle over party at every single window of opportunity until, in essence, people realize that with the internet and the communication mechanisms that we have today, people can run their own campaigns independent of the parties based on the ideas that they stand for, and sooner or later, people are going to realize we can vote for those people. This is the next best thing that's about to happen. This is the Elon Musk moment in American politics. This is the breakthrough. Pick whatever revolutionary moment, the Henry Ford moment. People are almost about to realize we don't need permission to vote for good people who are willing to put their name on a ballot, whether they're doing it as a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. We're close. And I would submit history will look back and see that the Trump presidency was the first time it happened. When you look back at it, in time, in retrospect.
Who's someone that came from outside the box, someone that came from outside the narrative. And, he had the financial resources to be able to do it. And a lot of people realized, hey, we're going to get on board. But what was interesting about that dynamic when we think back to 2016 in the primary process is the number of people that stayed in that race when it wasn't mathematically possible for anyone else but Donald Trump to win. And the only reason they stayed in that race in those primary races was due to the fact that the parties and their donors were telling them to stay in the race.
Right.
When it made sense to get out. I mean, I think of John Kasich won the state of Ohio that year, and I feel like he dropped more confetti than the Cleveland Cavaliers when they won the NBA title a few months later. He had this big parade and celebration. I'm like, someone needs to teach him math because there's zero chance of anyone but Donald Trump winning this nomination, but yet they stayed in and kept doing it.
So this is, I will tell you, 20 years from now, people will look back at this broadcast and go, wow. Because if you go back 20 years and listen to broadcasts that we've been around that much longer than that, and you had said we'd be having this conversation and Donald Trump would be the focus of it, you would say, no way in the world.
Well, wasn't it 20 years ago this summer would have been the summer, would it have not, or actually one congressional cycle before Barack Obama.
Exactly.
Because it would have been the summer of 2006, and he was elected in the fall of 2008.
I would submit to you that the person who knocked on the door of free agency first didn't walk through, but the person who knocked on the door was Barack Obama. Because his first election was definitely an election that brought people from all kinds of places because they saw him as a potential change agent. And again, we can argue, and we got a lot of things written on this, okay? We've got a track record here. We can speak about this historically. There's a lot of things that we were against from day one, but he did have that potential. That he chose to become rabidly partisan once elected, that had he continued from where he started, it could have been a transformational presidency.
Yeah.
But of course, it was, in essence, it wasn't genuine.
And take a look at AOC and how she came into light. She came from outside of that. She was an outsider,
right.
A disruptor.
Yes.
Now, she's to the left of where the Democrats
running
are.
as a Democrat in name only because she now has clearly said she's a socialist.
Yeah, and she beat an incumbent for that seat in a Democrat primary when a lot of people didn't participate.
And so then you say, well, okay, how would this work? Well, what if AOC decided now to run as an independent? Would she win that race against either a Democrat or Republican? And chances are pretty good maybe she would.
Well, and you look at Pennsylvania, you think of John Fetterman.
There's another example.
Could
he suddenly become a conservative free agent and win Democrat and Republican votes and say, guess what, I'm now an independent?
No doubt about it that he could do that. He has very high marks among Republicans in the state.
So you see what we're talking about here. It's like a board game.
It would be possible. The interesting thing in that would be is if he was to do it as an independent, he would be running against a Democrat and a Republican. So now you're looking at needing 33%. How does that divide? What does that look like? And it's interesting to watch. But stay in the state of Pennsylvania just for one more second. You think about, Josh Shapiro, who's one of the most popular governors in the country when you look at numbers. And the fact he wasn't included on the Democratic ticket, that was party politics in the previous presidential election, he made all the perfect sense to be Kamala Harris's running mate. And the Democrats pushed him out for a reason that didn't fit the party mantra, even though they would have been better off.
The funny thing about history is everything always stays the same until it all changes. And this is what happens in the concept of critical mass being built up in an electorate. And it is genuinely true that there are spiritual components to this. There are revival components to this. There are protest components in this. And there's technological components in this as well. And there are generational components in this. And what I would say is looking forward futuristically, all the indicators are not toward the success of the two-party system mentality, but that in reality, there's a change coming. Hard to predict exactly what it's going to look like, but there's a change coming. Okay, Alan, another listener.
Yeah, this is a comment we received from a listener in Lake Forest, Illinois. Came through over the weekend. Said, might I receive 10 copies of the Declaration of Independence if possible? I heard your broadcast yesterday on Moody Radio for the first time. I'm also ordering the book An Oration. That one jumped out to me over the weekend when I saw that come through, because this is someone who's heard us for the first time and they're ordering the book. You know, you think about those marketing gurus that talk to you. Hey, you have to touch somebody. You got to talk to them 3 times, and then maybe they'll consider, and then a 4th time, and maybe they'll do it. This person, they heard one honest offer, and they responded first time. I thought it was very beautiful.
Well, in full disclosure, I think it's because they heard the commentary being made on Wayne Shepherd's program, First Person, all right, which is a very successful
what a powerful
radio program,
huh?
and one well worth listening to, by the way. And so, thank you, Wayne.
Dave was my guest, and we talked about An Oration, and somewhere along the line we must have mentioned the Declaration offer as well, but. We're happy to oblige, right?
Yes, happy to oblige. And by the way, anyone that would like a copy of the Declaration and the Constitution and the booklet that we give out, it's always free of charge, and you can find it at thepublicsquare.com or at aproundtable.org. We are happy to give those away. Okay, anybody else got another listener?
I've got the one about the King George.
Yeah, let's go with that.
This person says, I heard David discuss a book he co-wrote concerning King George. I do not see it on the website. Is it still available? Thank you, and be of good cheer. So, I don't know.
I like that sign-off, yeah.
Yeah,
cheers to start back at you. The book is Oration, and it's John Quincy Adams that does the reclamation of George III's character in the speech at Newburyport, which inspired our dearest friend, Dr. William B. Allen, to write a paper which was recently published with the Heritage Foundation, and we are also going to republish that piece about the 3 revolutions of the 18th century. And in it, he covers the material that he has found in the British archives that's just been released that shows how King George III, as a young man, destined for the crown, was actually in the process of translating Spirit of the Laws, Montesquieu's famous work, and wrestling with the necessity of reforming the government of Great Britain along the lines of a more constitutional representative government, so much so that it becomes a major theme in the balance of his years as the monarch, and so much so that John Quincy Adams was onto it. William B. Allen discovered the records and published this paper. And so we have got copies of that paper in our show notes. We can get you the show notes there. And if you're in a hurry and you can't wait, W.B. Allen from Heritage Foundation should get you that paper as well on 3 revolutions of the 18th century. It's an excellent piece and strongly recommend it. And in essence, it changes everything we learned in school about King George III and nearly everything we've ever heard on Broadway as well.
Yeah, but it will eventually be on our website, available in a printed copy.
Yes, we will be republishing it, yes.
Okay, fascinating. All right, well, thanks for those responses. You're always welcome to contact us at The Public Square. You can do that through our website, AP Roundtable, or thepublicsquare.com. All right, moving on, we've got more topics to discuss. We'll get after it next here on The Public Square in a moment.
It's too long. They won't pay attention.
No one talks like that anymore. They won't understand.
Just read the summary online.
Don't you learn that in
It's
school?
above your reading
We
level.
can tackle that later.
American history is my history. Go to kidsonthesquare.com today and find the KOTS 250th Challenge.
It's a fun, interactive checklist with crafts, puzzles, recipes, and more.
Complete the list and you can become a KOTS 250th scholar.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
All right, back to our theme for this weekend on the Public Square, which is acknowledgement that it is Father's Day. And, as we often do with topics, we're going to take a little different angle on it, aren't we, Dave?
We are. We're going to go back to something that I think about a lot. I have in the last couple of years. Does anybody remember the 10 Commandments?
Vaguely. I think about it now and then. Yep.
Most people would say, you mean that movie? No. I mean the actual 10 Commandments. Does anybody remember the 10 Commandments? Now, let me immediately go.
We were at a concert the other night, and one of the singers has a song that references those letters in red. And my son said, look up on the screen. And during, I mean, it was loud and action-packed and fast-moving, but the 10 Commandments were what was put up.
The 10 Commandments was on the screen.
That was on the screen.
Okay. So, yes, there were 10 and one of them, now that, and they split in many different ways, but the first split that's well known among biblical commentators of all forms of both Judaism and Christianity is that the first 4 commandments deal directly with the individual's relationship with the Creator God of the Bible, and that the 5th commandment sort of moves to the first commandment, if you will, of how we are to deal with one another in accordance with God's perspective in His revelation. So the very first commandment that has to do with how we should conduct ourselves in regards to human relationships is honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. The first one is honor your father and your mother. And in the book of Ephesians, St. Paul says this is the first commandment with a promise. Honor your mother and father so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. In other words, this is not just a commandment from God. It's a commandment on relational integrity and how this is to work. But it also shows you that obeying this particular commandment has cultural ramifications in regards to your life. That's a lot in one little verse, isn't it? Honor your father and your mother.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how God says honor your father and your mother. In virtually all other ancient cultures, they would say honor your father.
No
period.
Kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Like, for example, in the Romans, in the Greco-Roman world, the Roman father, they had the concept of the pater familias. The Roman father was absolute dictator over the home. He had the legal right in Rome to put to death anybody in his household, including his wife or any of his children, if they displeased him, and nobody could touch it. That's in the Roman world. That is a fact, too.
I am so grateful I do not live in that society.
In the law of Moses, in the Jewish culture, God consistently says, honor your father and your mother, putting them on equal terms. Now, of course, the father is the head of the home, but not the brutal dictator of the home.
But this goes back to the same creator that we read about in the book of Genesis, who made them male and female. Mm-hmm. Right from the beginning, you see the equality of the creation. Now, there's a sequence of order, but it's never a question that they both share the same origin from the hands of God and the same value.
Yeah, the same intrinsic value.
The same intrinsic value. And that sets apart Judaism and Christianity from so many other cultures and so many other faiths. In fact, it's a radical difference between Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
Yes, in Islam, women are actually labeled as inferior. It uses the word inferior. Women are inferior to men. And before anybody says, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, yeah, I've read the Quran twice. I can bring my copy next week and we can go over it.
No, we've all been involved in studying the Quran and the Hadith and the traditions. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting about that is while this is a sensitive subject that causes people to go, ouch, is this going to hurt? We've all seen it now in America. You don't need lectured.
Yep.
You can tell.
It's right there in front of you.
That it's right there in front of you. And when you get over to the Middle East, it's
which I've been there too. Yes, I've seen that.
And Islam is not the only culture that still treats women that way. There's
Hinduism
around
and
the world that
several
do.
other religions and ideas. Yes.
Well, in addition to saying here, honor your mother and your father and your mother, there are other scriptures that teach us the relationship between husband and wife.
Yes.
What strikes me about this commandment in Exodus is it's not age specific. It's not honor your mother and father as a child, but as an adult. I still have to honor my mother and father who are now have gone on to be with the Lord, but when they were alive. And you do that in ways that are support, encourage, you're taking in their advice. Because Scripture also talks about the older generation passing on wisdom to the younger generation. So there's a two-way street there. We honor, they provide wisdom. And I know people come from all different kinds of backgrounds. My own father did not have a father per se. His parents divorced when he was tiny. He went through the foster care system, but he was a very excellent father. He was a loving father. He was someone who, in our home, displayed the love of Christ to my mom and to us as children.
The Bible is filled with examples of adoption and of people stepping into the role of parenthood. So this goes beyond simply biology. This is beyond that. This is who is your mother, who is your father, and are you honoring the person that is in that position in your life? It is biological, but it's bigger than that, and so that's important. So this is all inclusive.
Yeah, talking about the importance of fathers, a friend of mine one time made the comment, every time I watch a movie, more often than not, the theme of the movie underlying the whole thing is in search of father, in search of a father, in search of a relationship with a father. And ever since that comment was made and I watch movies, I see it time and time again. It's remarkable.
Well, it's one of the subjects that is repeated perpetually throughout ancient literature and right down to modern culture of the hour, is the quest for father love. Also the quest for mother love. Mm-hmm. And then that takes us into the whole, we could spend a lot of time talking about what Sigmund Freud did to the minds of the Western world in basically condensing all of human psychological frailties into your problems with mother love or father love and all that entire school of therapy or psychotherapy or whatever we might want to call it at this stage in its development. There's an old saying that I lose friends every time I say it because I don't know how to say it. So I'll mess it up because I think the point's worth taking. I've heard it said before that you can't outrise your raisins. And the idea that you never, ever escape your parentage, even if you never knew who your parents were.
So they're saying you're raisings.
Yes.
But they're just slurring it.
Right.
Okay, I get it now.
Outrise your raisins.
Okay.
I don't do it justice.
Right.
But Jeff needs the G in there to make it, that's right, it makes more sense. But the idea that you don't ever escape the fact that you didn't get here by yourself, that's spiritually very significant.
That is like a sort of a hindsight view, like what came before me. What I have repeatedly shared with parents over the years is when you're raising your children, when you become that father, when you become that mother, you are not raising your children to be competent, independent, 18-year-old, 20-year-old adults. You are raising the parents of your grandchildren. You turn around, even if you didn't have the father figure, you're turning around and becoming that figure generationally forward.
All right, let's continue this theme of it being Father's Day weekend. We'll continue it in our own fashion here on the Public Square. You stay with us. If you joined us late and ever need to catch up on any program through the years, you can find us online at thepublicsquare.com.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square.
Every day, people across the nation contribute to the mission of the Public Square. Because of those gifts, this broadcast is now heard on the radio coast to coast every day. Thousands are finding the path to true liberty every day because of the support of listeners just like you. Your gifts of any and every size are reaching lives today. Thank you for your support.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
Let's continue on now with the public square today. Interesting to have the panel talk about Father's Day in light of Exodus 20, honor your father and your mother. But there's another father, the father of our nation, that we could talk about and do talk about often on the program here, Dave.
One of the great ironies that we discovered in the research of George Washington, and of course, Dr. Allen preceded us. If you came here to the American Mission Center, you would find on the top floor of our library, the William B. Allen Library, and when you walk in, you'll see a flag, the commander's flag, George Washington's flag, and a bust of George Washington, and then a cabinet full of books. That cabinet full of books is the books that Dr. Allen reviewed and read and studied to be able to start his work on the 700-page work that he did on George Washington's life. And then from that work and studying his work, all right, we created a book called First, The Leadership of George Washington, which is about a 90-minute read. So we went from thousands of documents, 700 pages, to 90 minutes to try to capture the essence of George Washington's leadership. And one of the things that comes up very quickly about George Washington is he's called the father of our nation, but his father passed away when he was 11 years old. And so he didn't have a dad to raise him through those formative years coming forward. And then his older brother, who tried to fill that role, passed away when George Washington was 20. And so Washington was largely on his own in regards to models of fatherhood and parenting. And then you get to the next question of the father of our nation comes from a mixed family, a mixed marriage, if you will, a blended marriage. His wife, Martha Custis, had been previously married and was a widow. And so when George Washington married her, he in essence became the father of her two children, the stepfather, if you will, of her two children. Yet the father of our nation never had natural-born children. So he lost his father early. He came from a blended family, and yet we consider him, without a doubt, the father of our nation, the first. And so it's just, there's a great amount of irony in that. I'm not prepared to draw the conclusions of it, except to say that, isn't it ironic that he would, in essence, help to parent our understanding of what our nation should look like and then model it in his own relationships in regards to being a good stepfather and a grandfather to those children and do the very best that he could, but without natural-born children himself, which I just think is tremendously ironic.
That is amazing to think about, Dave. It's almost as though the calling on his life was such that he was needed elsewhere. You know, he had children elsewhere that he had to tend. I think Christ himself.
Well, that's
had no
fascinating.
Yeah, Christ himself had no earthly biological children. Some of the greatest thinkers, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis. These are not people who had natural children, and I'm sure you could go down.
So many of
history.
us feel that we're partially their offspring in intellectual pursuits and books and novels. And sure,
when you're a parent, when you're in the throes of raising your children, to be present and to be a good parent, you have to spend a lot of time, a lot of dedicated time. You have to say no to some things so that you can be present with your kids in real time.
So it's almost like his calling was focused.
Yeah.
It was focused on something other than being that parent.
Because we talk all the time. He wanted to get back to Mount Vernon and build that property. It's falling down around him. In certain places he wanted to get there and do it, and he obviously built that up over time. But he had to spend a lot of time away from it. So imagine if there were kids there that he was trying to raise.
That's interesting because he did a tremendous job of mentoring. People think everyone knows about Alexander Hamilton now because of Broadway, but people don't realize what a consistent and persistent father-like mentor that George Washington was for Alexander Hamilton, even when Hamilton really messed up his life. really messed up his life, Washington did not abandon him, ever. He did not abandon his friendship. And it would have been politically the correct thing to do, but Washington didn't abandon him. Let me read from the book first that we published, The Leadership of George Washington. For those who contend that George Washington was just one more rich white aristocrat who owned slaves, here is a set of facts that challenge that narrative. In 1789, after the war and the Constitutional Convention, George Washington was elected the first president under the Constitution of the United States. He had been home from 1776 to 1789 for very few months, especially during the critical planting and harvesting seasons. He considered his farm and estate at Mount Vernon in a state of disrepair and barely profitable. He could have legally sold some of the slaves held at Mount Vernon, but he refused to do so because he refused to break up captive families. His real cash assets were so low that he sought a bridge loan to help him get to Washington, D.C., so he could be sworn into office. He was denied the loan.
Wow.
So much for throwing around your clout, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that something? This is the father of our
country. He said, "No, you're not a good credit risk.
He couldn't get a ticket
here.
to Washington, D.C. to be a president because he had no money left.
What did he do? Thumb a ride?
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Use Uber?
This is the story that we never heard.
Let's talk about that title, the father of our nation. I mean, to me, it goes beyond the fact that he was the first president. It must refer more to, and I don't know where the title came from. Maybe you know who first described that to him. But it must be more a reflection of his overall character than the position that he held, right?
Well, Washington, I think, always believed that he was teaching, or he was always modeling, always mentoring, even when you are not consciously instructing somebody in a lecture. Now, son, watch this. Make sure you do it this way. You're still teaching because people are always watching you, and you're either teaching someone to do what is right, or through your behavior, you are teaching people to do things that are not right. Well, think of what he taught everybody. He was at the height of his power. He was a general of the army. He was the victorious general. And what does he do? He teaches all of us, hand over your power. Give it up. He hands over his sword. He resigns his commission. Everybody, all the crowned heads of Europe looked at that and they went, what is this guy doing? Nobody does this.
George III said, if he turns back in his power, he'll be the greatest man on earth, because no one ever has at that level.
And Dr. Allen wrote in that piece we discussed earlier that it took greatness in George to recognize greatness in the other George.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that part of it is that there was a parental sense of concern, and you guys used the word character. George Washington brought to us the concept of the national character. Fighting the war convinced Washington that Americans had the capacity to overcome their prejudices and their factionalism and become, in essence, one people with a national character built upon the Declaration of Independence and the sacrifice of the Revolutionary War. This was before we got to the Constitution. And his advocacy was that we would become one people of character, and that as one nation of character, we could actually become a federal system that could move toward the objectives of the Declaration of Independence and overcome the obstacles. Now, keenly aware he was of the problem of slavery, always. That is why at the end of his life, he absolutely mandated that all of his slaves would be set free. And then Martha followed. You say, well, why didn't he do it earlier? Because he didn't have the window of opportunity in any way, shape, or form to do it earlier and do it right and well. But this was, in essence, his last statement of attestation to the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal.
All right, well, this has been fascinating, but there's more to come on the Public Square here today. And once again, you'll find us online to listen to this program. If you ever miss us on radio, you can listen to us on YouTube, for example. Just search the Public Square. And with our smartphone app called the Public Square. All those options are available to you, and we hope that you'll find us and pass the word along about the Public Square. All right, coming back in a moment, we're aware that some stations, a couple may cut away at this time. If that's true, go online to listen to the rest of this program, the Public Square. Panel has been discussing Father's Day in our own way here today on the Public Square. Glad to have you along. And Dave, I'll turn it back over to you.
One of the things that George Washington was keenly aware of, in addition to the need for us to become a people of a national character, of an understanding, was the absolute reality that that character had to be anchored in the reality of the God of the Bible. When he was a child, he had a set of writings called the Rules of Civility. There were 110 rules that he would write over and over again, and we actually have handwritten a copy of it. In museums actually have a copy of his actual handwritten version of this. The last one, number 110, was labor to keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire called conscience. Now, I'm not suggesting that as a young child, Washington understood all of what that meant, but I will tell you, as a senior leader and the victorious general to whom the whole world was watching, George Washington absolutely understood the paramount importance of the spiritual surrender of our wills to the living God of the Bible, and to us coming into a frame of peace of mind that would come from the mind of Christ, by which we could govern ourselves and be a happy people. Now, he wrote that very close to those very words in 1783 as a victorious general from the battlefield, before we actually became a nation, when we were 13 now independent colonies after the surrender of Great Britain. And years later, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy would, in 1961, comment on those remarks at a prayer breakfast in this way, and I quote, "No man who enters upon the office to which I have succeeded can fail to recognize how every president of the United States has placed special reliance upon his faith in God. Every president has taken comfort and courage when told, as we are told today, that the Lord will be with thee. He will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Fear not, neither be thou dismayed." While they came from a wide variety of religious backgrounds and held a wide variety of religious beliefs, each of our presidents, in his own way, has placed a special trust in God. Those who were strongest intellectually were also strongest spiritually, keeping in mind that when a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. Let us go forth to lead this land that we love, joining in the prayer of General George Washington in 1783, quote, "that God would have you in his holy protection, that he would incline the hearts of the citizens to entertain a brotherly love and affection one for another, and finally, that he would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, without a humble imitation of whose example we can never hope to be a happy nation," end quote. The guiding principle and prayer of this nation has been, is now, and shall ever be, "In God we trust." That was John F. Kennedy speaking about the father of America, George Washington, and his fundamental belief in God and his understanding of the absolute necessity of the Creator-Redeemer and our relationship with him. And this is something that we find throughout and that is recognized in history. And this is the person who the people of the day say was most influential in forming the character of what it is that it will take for us to take the Declaration and the Constitution on the ground and make them real. So you can see Rules of Civility, 110, labor to keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire called conscience. Washington knew this was a spiritual equation. Now, we actually have some copies of that little booklet. If you'd like one, just get in touch with us. We'll send one to you. The Rules of Civility.
Be a pretty good thing to teach your kids these days, right?
Yeah.
And grandchildren.
Yeah.
By the way, yes, if you're a grandparent, you're still teaching, right?
Of course.
Especially when you're a grandparent.
And they come from a man who had a minimal education, formal education, right?
Yes. Homeschooled.
Yep.
Homeschooled, and then self-taught. Well, let me turn to the book of John, and let's take a minute and go to the first chapter of the book of John. And the reason I want to bring this up is because when we talk about fatherhood and our raisins, how we were raised, there is a reality that some of us have significant disappointment and even tragedy in the way that we were raised. There are many people walking around with father issues, mother issues. We've talked about the importance of biblical parenthood. How do I honor my mother and father if my father was a really bad guy? How do I honor my mother if my mother was a bad person?
I've got an answer for that. Because I, as a pastor, I know a lot of people who have asked me that question, and I said, try to live the life that you know that they should have lived, or that the life that they wanted to live, but they couldn't. And I say this as my father was an alcoholic, and even though he's home, he's gone now, I love him dearly, even to this day.
And I know that in the few minutes that we have left, we can't even begin to answer all of these questions, but I would like to lay a clue out that has touched my life and made me think a lot about this concept of you can't escape your raisings. I think that comment, by the way, is incorrect. And here's why. There's a passage in the New Testament in the book of John, the first chapter, beginning with verse 10. He was in the world, though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. As I understand what Jesus is talking about in the first 3 chapters of the book of John, we call it the old saying, ye must be born again. Sounds like George Whitefield, doesn't it? That was the theme of his evangelism in America in the Great Awakening. You must be born again. I will tell you, there are people who would love to have a new birth that would somehow wash away the tragic disappointments of their childhood. And I would submit to you that the spiritual reality of the New Testament anticipates that very need. That whether it's a new birth from a life of darkness, a new birth from a life of abuse, whatever it might be, that there is in fact in the new birth an appropriation that actually says you can be born again, not because somebody decided that they were going to be your parents, not because of natural descent or human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. So no matter what our raisins were, there is the hope of being risen with Christ. That God is our Father, Christ is our Savior, Redeemer, and older brother, and that God gives us a new life anchored in Him, no matter who we are. We could have the most perfect parenting model of our lives, the most wonderful family, storybook. You could be better than Ward Cleaver as a dad, all right, or had a dad that was that good, but you still must be born again. The point is there is a model in all of this parenting that brings us to the place where we can recognize that no matter how good, bad, or indifferent our mom and our dad were, that there is the creator of all moms, the creator of all dads, who would like us to be in his family. And that changes everything.
It reminds me so much of a letter that my grandmother wrote and incorporated into her will. So her children, my mother and siblings, didn't see that letter till after my grandmother was gone. And there's an excerpt from that letter that says that I really wish I had been a better mother. I know I made mistakes as a mother. And she quoted some scriptures, and she said at the conclusion of this paragraph, please make sure our grandchildren know the way home. So she was basically saying, don't depend on my frailties, my imperfections. Don't look at those, but take your responsibilities fresh and serious to make sure your children, my grandchildren, know the way home.
What better way to conclude this conversation today? Thank you for that, Melanie. And thank you all for listening to The Public Square. For the team, I'm Wayne Shepherd. We'll see you next time. Join us then and pass the word along about The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.